Here with John Thorrington to talk about MLS Academy. From the very beginning, there has been an academy for LAFC, and you had visioned how it would look like it is today, where you have LAFC 2 and you have a pathway. Starting back then, what were the discussions like to make sure you said, we have to start this organically so that it can lead to something bigger?
Yeah, that was one of the first decisions we made, which was to create an academy team 2 years before our first team ever kicked the ball. And discussions and the analysis as to how we would come into the youth landscape here were very thorough and deliberate. And what we decided to do was to start with one under-12 team. We feel that no matter whether you're a part of our academy or another academy or don't play at all, that the presence of LAFC should be good for the landscape here. We did not feel right coming in and then by definition taking players from other clubs. And so we decided to start organically from the bottom with a group of under-12s in 2016, two of whom I believe are still with us, both of whom have signed professional contracts in Eric Duenas and Brian Moyado. And it's interesting, I'm watching our players in GA Cup right now. That was the first real competition that our 12s had back in 2016. And to think what the academy now has achieved in all of the national team players and the homegrown signings and the recognition that they have earned through the build out, and that's thanks to all of the academy staff from day one. It's really incredible to see the growth of it, and now you have opportunities at MLS Next Pro for players to start their professional careers as well. It's been incredible, and I think with that very thorough that decision-making process, I think helped build what we think of in LA, which is a club that's very connected into the community, in the youth landscape as well. And I think what we tried to do was to partner with the existing clubs rather than have it be a zero-sum game. I'm a firm believer that if it's us fighting against our neighbor, then what chance have we got against beating Germany and Spain and what have you? So we tried to come in with that perspective and mindset to really grow the game across as many clubs as possible in LA. So that decision for us started with that under-12 team.
So you mentioned the under-12. Obviously, we have the LAFC first team. You mentioned MLS Next Pro. We've discussed that. There is a gap in between. So the partnership with Real SoCal and so many things done over the last few years. What was the vision to fill that space to make sure that there was all connected?
Yeah, so I think for us, the ideal would be that players, and it's very difficult to achieve this in Los Angeles as I experienced myself as a kid. The ideal would actually be to have kids not spending 2 hours in cars and actually spending that 2 hours kicking the ball against a wall or playing in the streets with their friends and what have you. So the idea of Real SoCal is to partner, as I mentioned earlier, with a really strong club who wants to be a part of this professional pathway for their players and their communities, and it increases our scale for sure. But for us, as much as it helps us in terms of talent identification, Nathan Ordaz is one example, player who came from then Real SoCal, now LAFC SoCal Youth, but to partner with the people that understand what LAFC are trying to do, and which is the furthest thing from the zero-sum game where we win, you lose. That's not good for the landscape at large. We want this to be the most competitive landscape, and anything we could do to build up these other clubs to make it more competitive for our academy, to increase the level of talent in LA, will only benefit LAFC and US soccer in general.
What is that level of talent? Because I think everyone looks at LA and go, here's the hotbed, and we say maybe the next Lionel Messi's there, but in reality, with you drive around Los Angeles, everyone's playing soccer in every part of town. What is that talent like? What have you seen that gives you optimism for where it can go?
Yeah, I think a couple things. One is the barrier of cost has now been removed. So a lot of players when I was growing up couldn't afford to get to the tournaments, they couldn't afford the fees. It's some fantastically talented players who weren't really given that opportunity. Now, due to the generosity of our ownership, there is not a dollar paid by a family or a player at LAFC Academy to compete. So I think that's one, is then that just opens up the funnel now where it might have been restricted on a pay-to-play model, whereas now we're getting and trying to capture as much of our talented pool of players as we possibly can. And then secondly, I think it's then providing them the right resources, coaching, performance psychology, conditioning, nutrition, all of the things maybe not done, and intentions are not done at the level of the first team because we want it to be aspirational, but then combining all of these things where you come here on a weeknight and they're under the lights here on these beautiful fields at Cal State LA, and they are competing in a real environment. And I think one key difference also is talent was so diluted when I was growing up. Each team had 2 or 3 really top players. Now all of those players are competing with each other on the weekend, but they compete against each other 4 nights a week here. And I think that is what you really need to develop the next Messi.
I get this all the time, so I'm sure you get it all the time. You'll get parents saying, how do I get my son or my daughter onto an LAFC academy? And you always hear this expression, slipping through the cracks, whether they're talented or not.
Yep.
So the scouting, and you mentioned the barriers that were there, and there are big ones about the money, the travel.
Yeah.
What LAFC is doing to find these players, to go out there and see them firsthand.
Yeah, so I think one thing that was intentional when we created this facility is we're downtown Los Angeles, so there is no part of this region that we cannot get to or don't have access to. And so our academy staff of scouts has regional responsibilities to find the best talent in each of these regions. And then we do not typically do a mass trial. We then will invite players to come in and train with the team to see how they fit. And then if they do, then they're invited to join the academy. So what I would like to touch on is that question of like, how do they get to LAFC Academy? The key job for parents is just to ensure that their kids love playing, because if you don't love playing, you will never put in the amount of time and dedication it takes to make it, whether that's LAFC Academy or hopefully as a professional. And I think the danger is actually the opposite, is that you're trying too hard to help them make it, and there's risk of burnout and frustration that you're then living out a parent's dream as opposed to something that has to be intrinsic in your own motivation.
Very well said. So the parents who are listening, great advice. And again, things are so much better off than they were, and LAFC is a big part of it. Best of luck in pursuing and developing these players.
Thank you.